Today is week 2 of the American Rose Society Virtual Arrangement Seminar. Judging candidates, I hope you are following along with your guidelines for judging rose arrangements, as we have indicated where most information is found in the manual. We also want to remind you that the text you see in red is something to pay close attention to for your exam. I would like to thank the following friends for sending photographs for this program and the program next week. Elena will be your presenter for part 1, and Bruce will be part 2. If you listened to our presentation last week, you will recall that Bruce covered information about show schedules, but I would like to begin with a few more comments on that topic. You do not have to be a judge to write a schedule for arrangements. Many creative arrangers have great theme ideas and ideas for arrangement classes. You should always ask the schedule writing committee to include your ideas. All local and district show schedules must be sent to the district arrangement chairman for approval. This chair must review the proposed schedule for compliance with ARS rules and guidelines. The district chair may make suggestions for improvements. Although these are only suggestions, they should be carefully considered if the schedule writer is not a judge. The schedule for a national rose show should be reviewed and approved by the National Arrangements Chair. If you are working on a committee to write an arrangement show schedule, you should be sure to consult Chapter 15-2 for details about information to include. Notice that the entry tag has the style of design at the top and AG, Arranger Grown, box checked. There are some older arrangement tags still in use where the exhibitor should print AG if that applies to the arrangement. This notation is important when decisions are made for higher awards. This year, I've seen a few arrangement tags where the arranger forgot to put the type of design at the top. And so this is very important to remember. If it says put it at the top, do what the schedule says. Here are the arranger's choice of design entries in class 17 in the Tacoma Rose Society show. Notice there's quite a variety of styles of arrangements here. Each arranger chose a different style. The use of a card of intent is important. I don't see it very often. People need to use it more, especially in modern designs. Use it to your advantage, especially in modern interpretations. Judges cannot stand and observe your artistic talent as long as you would like. But after reading the card of intent, I have often had that aha moment. This class was Titanic Belfast. And on the card that's sitting right where the orange arrow is pointing, Lois Ann has put just a couple sentences to help us understand her interpretation of the design. The same scorecard is used for both standard and miniature designs. Your show schedule will specify any requirement of each class. The 6 design principles, balance, dominance, contrast, rhythm, proportion, and scale, and the elements of design, space, line, form, size, texture, pattern, and color, are applied to all sizes of arrangements. Let's consider the standard and miniature designs shown here. Mass arrangements should be symmetrical with a single focal area near the lip of the container. Gradations in size, shape, and color are necessary. Let's evaluate the standard size design on the left and the miniature designs on the right. We are looking for roses that are not placed too close to other material or show gaps or voids. Does the plant material appear to radiate from one point of emergence? Did the arranger finish the back of the design? Or does it give the appearance that the arrangement is falling forward? How would you describe the silhouette shape of the design? What do you notice about the designer's use of color and texture? Those first impressions are important when you're judging. Now on to other important details you need to understand. Notice there are several statements written in red. Standard designs may use any type of roses. However, classes specified as miniature designs may only use mini and mini flora roses. Display space for miniature arrangements may not exceed 12 inches in height, width, or depth. The show schedule may specify a smaller space. I've seen classes in rose shows that only specify 6 inches. I've also seen some that say 10 inches, so you need to pay very close attention. Display space for larger arrangements and national challenge classes may be required to notify the arrangement chair to reserve space if this is specified in the schedule. Whenever possible, it is best to view miniature designs at eye level. If this is not possible, it is permissible to sit on a chair to be in a better viewing position for judging. As judges, there are times when you will see there are times you may see a design with one perfect bloom, and it's very artistically arranged with foliage, such as the example shown here. That one bloom must be at the most perfect exhibition stage or fully open bloom. Form, color, and substance must be evaluated and be the best possible for the variety of rose. In this case, gourmet popcorn has fresh stamens, good petal substance, and the outer edge of the flower forms a circle. You may find many interesting containers at craft fairs or at a Rose Society meeting or at an ARS National Convention. Take your treasures home and try things out. In an ARS show, modern classes would work with this container. This container would be perfect in a class that is restricted to 6 inches, height, width, and depth. Notice that the container is almost 5 inches tall. An important thing to remember is that all components, the container, roses, and filler material, do not seem out of proportion to one another. Proportion and scale are very important components of a miniature design. Even though proportion and scale are only worth 5 points each on the judging scorecard, that combined 10 points is the difference between a blue ribbon and a red. Which rose looks in proportion to the container? Notice baby Betsy McCall is just under 1 inch, and the miniature rose, Olivia Rose, is almost 2 inches. This rose has a visually pleasing relationship to the container. Perfection of the rose may not be so great, but it is good size for this container. You may always use miniature or mini floras blooms in a class designated as miniature class, as the schedule does not state that one or the other must be used. In these two designs, I see balance, rhythm, and the roses are dominant. I also see contrast, proportion, and scale. Also notice the effective use of backgrounds and underlayments to complete these designs. They are not required, but as you see, they can add to the design's impact. More on that topic next week. It is possible that the schedule will specify only miniature roses or only mini flora roses to be used in that design. Pay close attention if you are judging classes with these restrictions. Conformance points will be deducted if a large miniature rose is substituted for a mini flora in this class. Rose show clerks. Those of you who are not already judges or candidates to become judges should pay close attention here. I hope after watching these 3 presentations, some of you will be inspired to volunteer to be an arrangement clerk at the next local Rose Society Rose Show. You will learn how a rose show works, and you will feel more comfortable entering rose arrangements, knowing what is happening when the entries close. So as rose show clerks, you're the link between the judges and the recording table. And there will be some work that needs to be done, and it will be explained to you. You're not allowed to touch or remove the arrangements. That's very important. And a good thing to do is listen to the comments with the judges, what they're saying. You'll learn a lot. When the judges have finished their evaluation, either with a scorecard or just talking through about the arrangements, ribbons will be awarded. Notice that these ribbons were from a national rose show and that the ones on the far right are smaller ribbons for miniature arrangements. Some rose shows have gone to using blue, red, and yellow dots at the time of judging, and then the winners can self-address an envelope to get the earned ribbons in the mail. Higher award eligibility. If you have been following along in your arrangements guidelines, also sometimes called the judging manual, you will note that Chapter 8-4 has another handy chart to remind you about the special requirements of various awards. Here's something to think about. Blue ribbons can be given to arrangements that earned 90 points. Higher awards must have earned 92 or more points on the scorecard. When I was an apprentice judge, I heard that the area of 90 or 91 points called a light blue ribbon, meaning that the design is good, but it's not going on to higher awards. This is not an official phrase, just a way of communicating the concept among judges. Another thing to think about is the area of creativity and expressiveness. They are worth 15 points on the scorecard. If you see the same exact container and design in multiple rose shows, with the only difference being the roses each time, is that creative? Now we move on to awards for arrangements. The preface to your guidelines has a convenient chart that reminds you of the requirements for each rose arrangement award given at an ARS rose show. Most are given at local shows, but the section at the bottom are awarded to classes for district or national trophy certificates, trophies or certificates. Certificates are now given to winners in these district and national trophies. It would be helpful if this chart was printed and given to the judging team at a rose show. You will get a few more details about the district and national trophies later in this program. The entry tag is your point of communication with the exhibitor. One experienced exhibitor friend of mine shared her method for writing comments on the back of tags. She called it plus, minus, plus. First, start off with a positive comment. Second, comment about the most noticeable problem with the design. Third, end with a positive statement. Sign and date the back of the tag. Here you see one entry tag after all the judging is complete. The front of the tag indicates class placement and ARS higher awards. Judges wrote comments on the back, signed and dated the tag. Some arrangers need to have this information for their records to become a future judge. Princess of Arrangement and Miniature Princess. I don't see this given very often. It's a class where all parts of the rose plant are used. It's a very fun class to work on. Use of accessories, dried roses, and other fresh plant material other than from roses will render the arrangement ineligible for a first place award. Other rosettes for special classes. Duke of Arrangement, 92 points. Notice that 92 points again, 92 or more points, class winner, meaning blue ribbon. Arranger grown must be checked or printed on there, and correctly named roses. The Duke is given to a small arrangement with any class of roses used. No accessories are permitted. Not less than 10 inches and not taller than 20 inches height as specified in the schedule. Since there are height restrictions, there's no miniature Duke award. The Duchess of Arrangement, again, 92 plus points, class winner, arranger grown, correctly named roses. Class specifies fresh roses with dried or treated plant material. There's also a mini Duchess award if that class is written into the schedule. Court of Etiquette is an award that is given as a certificate rather than a rosette. This is a functional tray. It is a display that you could imagine using for a meal or tea, and the class actually had something to do with tea. Court of Etiquette award can also be specified for an exhibition table that has a rose arrangement and a non-practical artistic display. An exhibition table does not have eating utensils and is for display purposes only. Your rose show schedule will clearly state the type of display required for the class. Another higher award that is given a certificate is the Keepsake Award for Best Dried Arrangement. Next week, you will see and hear many examples when I discuss that class. The Rosecraft Award is a certificate award given to another group of classes that uses dried roses. Next week, you will see many examples of beautiful rose crafts. The best entry in a standard or miniature class for novice arrangers. Here are some of the requirements. The exhibitor has not previously won a first place arrangement in an arrangement section of an ARS Rose Show. Novice entries may also compete for ARS medal certificates and ARS miniature medal certificates if the roses are arranger grown and are correctly named. Junior arrangements, restricted to arrangers less than 18 years of age. Junior arrangements are awarded, they're eligible to be awarded a Junior Royalty Rosette, ARS medal certificates, and ARS miniature medal certificates. If, again, here we go, 92 plus points, arranger grown roses and roses that are correctly named. And I want to point out the picture on this slide because it was done by a 7-year-old. Now, granted, her mom is an arrangement judge and has taught her very well. I think by the time this young lady gets to be 18, she's going to be a terrific arranger. Maybe next year she'll clerk. Best judges entry. Many shows have a special category for the judges of the show. The class is restricted to arrangement, photography, or horticulture judges and or apprentice judges at that show. The best judges certificate may be awarded, but this class is not eligible for ARS medal certificates. In my experience, the gold, silver, and bronze certificates are the most coveted awards in the arranging section of a rose show. Maybe that's not true in your area of the country, but it is still important for every judge to know the classes that are and are not eligible when awarding gold, silver, bronze medal certificates. These medal certificates are awarded above all other ARS awards to the highest scoring arrangements in both standard and miniature using arranger-grown roses. Lots of information in red here for you to remember. Designs may be awarded more than one award if worthy. This modern parallel design by Joe Martin recently won the Gold Medal Certificate for standard arrangements, the ARS Artist Award, and the Tacoma Rose Society Best in Show Award at the 2023 Tacoma Rose Show, where there were more than 50 arrangements displayed. Two sets of ribbons and two sets of gold, silver, and bronze certificates are available. Now, here's a chart that's been adopted recently by the ARS board. Each trophy on the left has specific requirements to be eligible for an ARS national or district arrangement trophy. To offer that trophy in your district show, district schedule writers must contact the district director. Special certificates have been created that are available through board members to download and print on your choice of paper. If a district does not use a challenge class in that year stated, it may not be saved for another year. What happens if, like my own district, Pacific Northwest, you no longer have a district rose show? The district director may decide that the class can be given at one of their popular local rose shows. Again, coordination goes through the district director. National rose shows. There was a time about 10 or 12 years ago when the beautiful physical trophies were shipped around the country from headquarters in Shreveport, Louisiana, to a district or national show for display and engraving of names of the winners. Due to increased shipping and insurance costs back then, the tradition has ended. Now, certificates are issued to winners of these prestigious classes. Often, prizes are also given to winners. We need more groups to host ARS national conventions. In 2024, we have one convention scheduled, September 9 to 13 in Warwick, Rhode Island. So we are in need of other groups to host at other times. Contact Bruce or Maggie Barr to find out what you need to do and how far in advance arrangements should be made. Here is an example of a very tasteful certificate that is now awarded. Next, Bruce will continue with information about modern arrangements, and we will have questions at the end.
Thank you, Elena. In part 2 of this week's presentation, I'll be looking at Chapter 13, Modern Arrangements, Their History and Background, Chapter 4, Judging Modern Arrangements, and Chapter 8, Judging Special Classes. So, for Chapter 13, the modern concepts for floral arranging began to evolve in the early 20th century as we moved from the 19th, very traditional forms, in parallel with movements such as the other visual arts. And some of these changes were radical. Let me give you a few examples from the visual arts. Pierre Mondrian created this work of the red tree in 1908, very impressionistic, and his interpretation of that tree in its location. In 1911, he returned to the same tree and did this painting. He's become more abstract, It's losing the idea of all the individual branches. You're getting more of a concept of a tree. But look what happens when he returned the following year in 1912. This is just his interpretation of tree nests, a radical change in the course of 4 years and how he was approaching his art. So changes happened very rapidly in the visual arts. Well, changes also happened in music. Most notable is the example I'm going to show you from Igor Stravinsky's 1913 Rite of Spring, which caused a riot in the theater. In this passage, the underlying rhythm is a steady, traditional beat. People are used to that. But watch with the exploding notes and feel the tension in this particular piece of music. Imagine this also as a modern design. Here we go. We're coming up with traditional rhythm. Beat, 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 beat. So you've got a very non-traditional arrangement of notes, and Stravinsky drove people crazy with that. The same thing can happen in your designs. Not that you want to drive people crazy, but you can alternate your rhythm in such a way that it's very, very different. Well, in architecture, the same thing was going on. We had new movements of Cubism, Art Deco, Bauhaus, and the work of Frank Lloyd Wright. The trend was to move to a style displaying simplicity and strength, which was achieved through the use of strong, simple lines and a sense of rhythm and balance, stressing the strength and boldness of their designs, no longer traditional. So roses are always featured element in a modern arrangement in the rose shows, and this is achieved in part by reducing the other floral material when compared to traditional arrangements. And so here, in modern world, you arrangers are free to express your creativity with the use of your color, form, texture, and space. We're no longer restricted to the traditional one line. It may be masked, it may be a line mask, but it's gradated from large to small. Colors have gradation as well. So here we're talking about completely different kinds of arrangements. And so we can see a great deal of creativity. Let's compare what we covered last week for traditional with modern arrangements. We have principles of design. Let's take a look from traditional to modern. Balance. In traditional, it's both a physical balance and a visual stability that we look for. It should be evident. In the modern, it's more of a visual stability. We don't necessarily have a physical balance that we're seeing, and we want to be careful not to put our traditional mindset into a modern design. Dominance. Here you'll see both traditional and modern, the roses must dominate. They have to be high quality roses, beautifully groomed, wonderfully grown. Contrast. In traditional, we see a minimal amount of contrast. Complementary colors are used within your design. Also, materials that you put in with it should also complement things, and your container should be traditional and complement your design. Modern, here we have high contrast is evident, not only in your colors, your material and container, but everything you put into that particular design should be of high contrast. Rhythm, traditional, just like you heard in the underpinnings of the Rite of Spring, very traditional, even, steady. You may have gradations in size and color of things, but you also have gradations in, like in music, in volume of things. Things change, but they're kept within that steady beat. In modern, it's non-traditional, and the rhythm is unpredictable. You can push the envelope. We have interrupted rhythms. Proportion and scale. Again, we're very similar, but the visual pleasing relationships just go to pleasing relationships. They form that contrast of really pushing that envelope, and but still, as the judge, if you look at it, is the whole a very pleasing thing. get a little more specific in traditional versus modern. All principles are observed in traditional and modern designs. While traditional is restricted by conventional rules, whether geometric or natural forms, there are no restrictions by conventional rules in modern. In traditional, we have a limited emphasis on space and depth. Most shapes are closed and geometric, but in modern, the emphasis on space and depth is different. It's both within the design and within the area of the design. The whole thing is presented. So there's that emphasis on space and depth. In traditional, we have one area of interest and one point of emergence. In modern, you can have multiple points of emergence. In traditional, that point of emergence is generally at the lip of the container that you've used. In modern, it can be anywhere in your design. In traditional, we have conventional placement of materials. Again, gradation occurs and spacing is even. In modern, we have unconventional placement of your components and plant materials. In traditional, things are restrained. There's symmetrical balance. In modern, things are dynamic. A lot of movement is possible, and there's an asymmetric balance that occurs within your design. In traditional, the rhythm is one strong line, one direction, the focal area at the lip of the container again. In modern, it's simple, strong, dynamic lines, and the rhythm may be abrupt, but it must move throughout the design. You as a judge should be able to follow that line, that rhythm going through the design. In traditional, we have complementary, low contrast colors and forms are preferred, but in modern, strong, bold, high contrast colors and forms may be used for effect. Your container in traditional should complement your plant material. It's usually more subdued, not bright and shiny, but in modern, the containers can be unusual. They're often arrangement made, and they can be minimal or complex and may have multiple openings. So let's move on to judging those kinds of arrangements, our chapter 4 of the guidelines. Well, here's just a quick review. When judging modern arrangements, look for that dynamic balance. It doesn't have to be actual balance, but things should be balanced. The movement and rhythm can be erratic. There's an implied line direction that you can follow throughout the design. Strong contrast should be evident. The arranger's creativity and imagination should come forth. The dominance should be with the roses, and there should be a reduction of other plant material in your design. Well, containers. Here we have 4 different containers. The one in the foreground is a composed container by a designer. Notice it's a roof shingle, some corrugated tubing of various sizes. We have multiple points of emergence here that are possible. And this is a great thing to use if you are judging a show and want to enter, but not stick around to the end of the show, whether it's day 1 or day 2, and pick up all your materials. It can be left, and some lucky designer may pick it up and use it for their own. On the far left, a tall black votive candle holder. The opening spaces allow a lot of things to happen visually with that design, whether it's another point of emergence, and it's a wonderful container to use for designs. The middle was a metal napkin holder from IKEA, I believe, years ago. Think of all the points of emergence that can happen here. And on the far right, a cylindrical container with that wing punctuated by openings. That can allow you to do many great things. Now, I would suggest that anytime you walk into a hardware store, you start looking around. What could I use in arrangement? Colored wire, that might be a good thing. Copper tubing, sure, why not? This corrugated tubing comes in all sizes. Be on the lookout. And your supply in your arrangement area may increase greatly if you start looking at things differently. Points of emergence. In modern, we have more than one point of emergence. This creates options for unconventional rhythm, whether in combining multiple containers or in the use of a single container. On the left, we have two containers made by our friend here in the North Central District, Lois Ann Helgeson. Notice the number of openings we have in these containers. Well, when combined with other material and roses, we have unconventional placement, multiple openings, but yet creating a pleasing whole. On the right-hand side, a small container for a miniature design, 2 points of emergence, 2 openings, create a spot for roses. We still have good rhythm here. We have good contrast here. Notice the designer hasn't done everything the same at each opening, which is perfectly acceptable in the world of modern. Each point of emergence should generate visual interest. An isolated leaf or bloom may be insufficient, but you as a designer have to make that decision. And roses are often placed at each point of emergence, although they do not have to be. You'll notice some on the left where the roses are not in each point of the container for emergence. Rhythm should be non-traditional. On the left, we have 3 very nice roses in good condition, but notice their placement is not even. There's a greater space between the middle and the lower rows when compared to the rows in the middle and the upper rows. It creates a little bit of tension there and allows other things to happen in that negative space with the entrance of the twine branching, the contrast with the rhythm of the circles behind it and the large block, black and back, and the underlayment. It all works together as a whole, but it's non-traditional. In my design to the right, your eye should be able to follow the roses starting at the bottom left-hand corner, going back up, coming down to the center, and back out the design at the top. Contrast that with the circle and the triangular shapes included in that design, and you have contrasting rhythms. Color. We're looking for very strong contrasts in the colors used in your design. It can be a statement. Black and pink, black and orange have frequently been employed, but other color contrasts are based on the color wheel. Here we have yellows and blue. Chris Poppy created this design at our workshop in the North Central District a few years ago, working on modern. And so we were playing around with different backer boards, and we'll talk more about that next week. But we found that the blue really popped those roses in this particular design. Combine that with the green element and the metallic and the natural material, and it creates a very high contrast in this particular design. Abstraction distorts material for emphasis or effect. An abstract design must contain at least 2 forms of abstraction. Back in the 1980s, Russ Anger, for whom one of our national trophies is named, wrote this information about abstractions. He broke it down to minor, moderate, and complete abstractions. So in minor, there are 3, in his opinion: wiring a leaf, painting or treating dried plant material, never the roses, trimming, clipping, bending fresh or dried material into a new form. Moderate, the selection materials used, and the placement, some used in non-realistic ways. Complete abstraction leads to the idea that the preponderance of the non-realistic groupings must be abstract, but abstraction is not the total dominance of the design. It is the rose that should dominate. So he looked at 6 things. Plant materials used in a different way than the plant grows, components juxtaposed rather than gradation, penetrating of space and interpenetration of space, non-radial placements, not a single point of emergence, dynamic balance versus visual, and unexpected color combinations. I've done a little work here and changed the font color. And I think over time, since the 80s when Russ wrote this, our understanding of abstraction and our familiarity with abstraction has increased, and we're beginning to limit it more as judges, I think, in that we look more at the things that people do to their material rather than what they use. So you can wire a leaf and change its shape. You can paint or treat the material to create a color contrast. You can trim or clip or bend. You can place it in other ways. You can penetrate space. The selection of materials, by nature, it's not going to be the most important thing in an abstract design. So our thinking is changing, but we have to remember there have to be at least two different abstractions within a design to make it an abstract arrangement. Just wiring two leaves differently is not two abstractions. But if you wire a leaf and you place it in some non-realistic way, that is two forms of abstraction. So let's take a look here. Also from one of our workshops, Carmen Schultz did this design. You can see the evident bending of leaves with wire. Sometimes the wire shows, sometimes she's putting the wax flower stem through it. And she's creating new forms of that leaf. She is placing roses in a non-realistic way, coming straight out to your right. It's just not how roses grow. So she is penetrating space with the wax flowers on the leaves. She is bending leaves. She is placing things in non-conforming ways. So she has abstracted a number of things in this design to create a unified whole. Give her some benefit of the doubt here, because it's a workshop. We don't have the best roses to work with all the time, not like you'd get out of your own gardens. Dominance of roses is critical. Last week, we showed you a picture of large silver discs and gears and red roses. The roses lost their dominance against that bright, shiny silver surface. And so it lessened that dominance of the roses and made the container and the other components more prominent. Be careful as a designer, be aware as an arrangement judge with that. The amount of material you use should generally be less is more. You want to emphasize that simplicity, and the use of non-rose floral material can result in the loss of important negative space within your design and blur the distinction between a good modern design and a more traditional arrangement. So let's look at the type of arrangements that may occur within a schedule and within your rose shows. Abstract design. So again, this is where plant material and other components are not used as themselves, but as more or less pure shape, line, texture, color, sensations in space that you have. But it's all used according to design principles. And an abstract design must have at least, again, two abstract qualities. This is a photo I took years ago at a show. It begins to get into abstract. I think we probably have two qualities of abstraction here. You'll notice in this particular design, rose leaves have been removed from the stem farther down, closer to the kenzan in the container. You can see the nodes there. And we have penetration of space of the rose within this plastic disc. As Elena pointed out when we were talking about this design, it kind of reminds her of a ballerina. And I'm not sure what the class title was in this one, but it begins to get into the abstract form here. Coming from other sources, this was not a show design on your left, but you can see it does use roses. The sweeping nature, that cyclonic action, is you notice they have copper wire there through which they have wrapped this green material, these leaves, and sometimes the equisetum. That is using that material in a non-standard way. Taking the equisetum with wire, bending it into those curls also is a non-standard way of looking at the equisetum. So we have a number of abstractions here, and I can imagine a category having to do with a whirlwind or tornado or something of that nature. On the right-hand side, from the world of designs, we see the equisetum has been bent here to create negative space within and outside the design. and also the bending and curling of that major, I expect it's an aspidus relief at the container level there, also is an abstraction. So a couple of different forms of abstraction here. Avant-garde is a stranger category not seen too often within rose shows, but here arrangements are futuristic in design, and it's really unconventional ways of incorporating unique or novel materials in innovative ways, but still observing all principles of design. A couple of examples here. Rich Baird did this on the top left. You can see the wires extending out to various blooms there, but you see no stems, you see no leaves. It's futuristic, it's unusual, but yet there's balance, there's dominance, there's rhythm. All things occur here. On the right-hand side, we see very interesting materials, radical radiation from that palm frond there, the strong wood, and the placement of the roses. What I really appreciate most are the rocks at the base of this holding it all together. Very avant-garde and hardly ever seen in rose shows. On the left here, white versus black, oftentimes used in avant-garde. Some roses are on their stems and have foliage, some are not. Some are directly in containers, some are hanging down off the top of the backer board there. So you can still see rhythm happening in this, with starting at the topmost rose and going on the far right-hand curve. You have an interior curve and you have a block of color there. Blocking of color is important in some types of avant-garde. On the right-hand side, almost optical art here, with the use of paper or fabric, I'm not sure which it is, but as a backer, as an underlayment, as a cover for the smaller little stands that are being used. But those roses dominate. The branch material almost loses itself within this design. I find it very interesting, but you know it's still there, but it's not taking a major part of this design. Freeform arrangements are often found in modern classes. It's a type of modern arrangement using plants naturally, but with design free from conventional ideas and patterns, stepping away from that traditional use. So Barbara Gordon did this within an oval frame here. The roses are masked. You could call it a mass design, but it's not a traditional one. There's no gradation of color. There's no spacing is irregular. There's no gradation of size happening. The lining is going around that oval, much as it would do in nature. So we're creating a freeform design here. There's a bit of abstraction with the rolling of leaves for effect. So a number of things going on here, but primarily it's a freeform design, as is the one on the right. There may be these curves in the container where it holds one cup, if you will. That curve of black is well hidden, but it becomes the starting point for the form that is followed with the green material and the roses as well. It's following kind of natural lines there. One thing we see very often as judges is the use of long grapevines or other such material. On the left is sisal, I believe in some way roping, that is twisted and turned and creating shapes. Far right, we do see red and white roses aligned somewhat traditionally, but it's not a gradation of white, red, white, red, white, red. No, we're changing that up a bit. The placement is different, and it's like roses grow naturally in the form of the grapevine there. And similarly to the left, the sisal forms this looping and the roses are placed within that. Mobiles. Well, it's a visually balanced grouping, freely moving, suspended forms, which could actually move if walking by creates an air current. Let's see what people have done here. We saw this picture on the left last week with traditional, with just basic contrast here. And in this point, the silver and hoops and stars begin to dominate because the roses can't. The roses are all facing outward for the most part. And was that a case of things twisting in this design? Or as a designer, you probably should be aware that your design may twist, and you'd want to pull those roses forward so that you see them in full front at some point in this arrangement. I did one with driftwood hanging. I would argue this probably isn't mobile because there's no way that that's going to move on its own. It's just way too heavy. You would need a strong fan to get this to turn around. So it may be hanging, but is it mobile? On the left, a very interesting combination of twisted forms, circular disc there it looks like, and a rose is placed within that. I can imagine this rotating nicely in the breeze and creating different shapes, different viewpoints. So it's a good possibility here. And on the far right, we have the wings and the roses, very stunning against the black and the pink roses and the white. Very unusual, and it's taking flight, as it were, also mobile. Just as in traditional, having line, mass, and mass, in the modern world, we can have the same three designations. But it's distinguished here in modern through the choice of materials, the container, and the spacing of the roses and whatever else you use. Let's take a look. We saw Ileana Occam's last week as well for high contrast. Now take a look at the rhythm that's occurring here. It is a line, but it isn't that traditional line. Spacing is quite close together on the bottom, more separated on the top as you get to the bud form. The contrast with the rhythm of the green disc, the bent metallic form there, and other materials create a line that is emphasized, but there's a whole lot of contrast going on here. The right-hand side, roses are beautiful. We have them placed differently within this particular arrangement. The smallest one, the least mature, is in the center at the bottom, rather than at the top hanging out there by itself on the far upper right-hand corner. The wings of the metal, I'll call it a container here, give a nice contrast with that, but emphasize the lower portion, not the upper portion. And yet it all works together. Modern line mass has a lack of material or progression of bloom development. Karen Ernstberger, left-hand design here, has a mass of roses, but notice they don't necessarily work in a gradation of complementary colors. The yellow there, the brighter reds, the more apricot roses, and the pale pinks. Very different arrangements, actually 3 different containers, but there's unification within the flax leaves being bent and interpenetrating each other themselves on that upper line of visual. So it's a line mass, but it is modern in so many respects. On the right-hand side, we see roses being put in non-traditional way, being very parallel to the surface of the table. Not realistic. Pussy willow the same way. The clematis seed heads give a nice contrast in there. So this also could be considered a line mass in the modern sense. Modern mass, there's the lack of the regular form we have, and there's no progression of bloom development within this as well. On the left-hand side here, we see the roses emanating from the container in a large mass. But the eye is drawn to the right by that bud, by the directionality of the equisetum and the other materials, the looping of things through and around, and the whole thing together is a mass, but not in the traditional sense. The right-hand side, Sally Eastman has done a study in purple. Those roses are massed together, but it's not traditional. She is complementing the disc of glass. The heuchera leaves front and back give good contrast and coordination with the shades of purple. So interesting concept and development of that particular design. My design on the left had to do with a starship, a lyric and some song that was from the Gateway Rose Show a couple of years ago. Notice on the I'm not thinking of the name of the rose, I can't do it. One of the Austin roses, Port Sunlight, they're not, there's no gradation of size here. They're all fully open. And so that's hardly traditional whatsoever. On the right-hand side, the roses may be very separate, but let your eye see the whole thing as a mass. There's spacing in there, it's irregular, but if you go from the top bud all the way to the lower blooms at the bottom, that really is a mass design. It's penetrated by a number of forms. Things are in unusual placement. It's very modern. Parallel designs. We have two or more groupings of materials using one or more containers as the entire unit. And the groupings may be placed in any direction, vertical, horizontal, or diagonal. They must be parallel in the same direction. And they must have negative space between the groupings and appear as one arrangement. Diane Summers entered this parallel arrangement in our district row show a number of years ago. The elements of each grouping is the same, but on a diagonal, we may be losing the visual idea of the separation of the units, but it is there because of the spacing of things. We understand, our mind says, yes, the spacing is there. If we look at it from the side, you would see that. On the right-hand side, Donna Smith has used two components here, very similar. Would it have been better if everything was exactly the same side to side? Perhaps, but I think it's still a very pleasing arrangement here. Oftentimes people see an illustration or given a demonstration at a workshop, and the designs appear very similar within the same row show. Elena provided these for me, and yet there are differences. In the lower left-hand picture, we see the roses are staggered somewhat. They're not basic rows of roses. And there is perhaps a greater amount of space within those, between those components compared to the one above it with the pink roses. What I appreciate in the one above is the idea that the larger, more mature roses are above the buds. That is not a traditional thing to do. So we see some good things happen in each of them. On the right-hand side, we see the winner of the category. On the right-hand side, we have three basic components, and they are relatively similar, but there are minor differences of placement and length of materials. The design to the left, I believe, are two different containers, two components of roses, but the idea of parallelness is disturbed by that monstera leaf and the one rose at the base. We're not seeing two relatively similar components there of the design, rather it's being interrupted, and so that would be a lesser scoring design there. Stabile is a modern arrangement that is static in sculptural form. It's not moving. It's in a fixed position at the base, but the whole does create an effect of motion throughout. So in mine on the left, I use driftwood on a base which is constructed, and the motion of the driftwood, the placement of the roses gives you an up and down feeling there, the motion. On the right-hand side, we see two roses, both in good condition. The intersection of the, I believe, iris leaves against the circle of metal, the placement of the wood there, all give movement, but the object itself is stable. Stretch designs are very popular lately in a lot of modern classes, and it's a type of design with two units, one smaller than the other, having some sort of connective feature extending between the two units. Elena did this design using Lois Ann's containers from years ago. The roses are penetrating in different places. We have one coming straight out of a container, modern in that way. The wax flower is used appropriately throughout many of the openings, and the bare grass connecting the two together forming that connective feature between the two designs, making it a whole. On the right-hand side, Elena Welcome again has presented a nice arrangement, two glasses containing their floral material and connected by the vines between them. Nancy Reddington entered this martini glass arrangement in the stretch design. So we see two roses in their separate containers, and the black stem of the martini glass is echoed in the black branching, which is your connective material between the two. And coming from the digital photography contest this last year, Lynette Trula has this design with the red underlayment that really helps the red connect on your design. The fabric as an underlayment and backer, the container all work together, and the twisted wire material going through and connecting the elements in that particular design make it a good stretch arrangement. And synergistic. It's a modern design composed of 3 or more separate arrangements, creating that unified whole. So stretch was 2, synergistic being 3. On the left, I used groupings of columns to create the bases. The individual arrangements are different in color, but the materials are the same, and it creates a unified whole as a synergistic design. Pat Bilson on the right-hand side used the same rows throughout, and the equisetum is her connective material among those 3 containers. Very nice job on that one, Pat. Transparency. So it's a 3-dimensional design type where some of the components will be seen through transparent or semi-transparent components as well. Mine on the left was from a show at a casino, and so I was using reds and blacks and yellows to pull that in as well. You see some components coming through the hardware cloth there, both in front and in back and on top. And then to the right, we see a clear candle holder, I expect, with the roses placed in front, behind, and on top. Now the rows behind, because of the way the transparent glass is presented, increases that and gives it more color volume within that design and creates a stronger base. Paula Williams used a screening effect here to have some components behind, in front, and above. And so you're seeing some of the arrangement through that pierced screening. Charlene Head, it looks like it to me is a plate rack or perhaps a CD player rack, which some elements penetrate toward the front, some are behind. And so you can see through that, you can see the other components are quite visible as far as the containers that she's used. No green material whatsoever. And the roses up top seem to be on different kind of stem, which she has carefully hidden on that one. So good contrast with the rigidness of the rack versus the twisting of the material. Very interesting, Charlene. Underwater designs. So this is a design with the focal area placed under the water in a clear or transparent container. And the rules ask for 1/3 or more of the arrangement to be under the water line. Tricky concept, because you want to fill that container as high as you can without spilling, usually done finishing touches right at the table as you place it down. Curtis Allmiller entered this design in a clear cube, and he has a little less than half of the design under the water with the extension of the grasses above it. Now notice what's happening on the surface of the water and to the left of the cube. You're getting reflections there of material that's in the water. So you're increasing the color and the shape and the form of your design within that cube here. It's important to use distilled water in these designs because it's less likely to show bubbles. And it's a little trick to make sure they're very good. On the right-hand side, this one is to me like a ship in a bottle. I don't know how the person got everything in there and lined up as they did. very incredible job where almost all of the arrangement is underwater. It's a beautiful job there, that one. And one of my favorite pictures too. Marty did this on the left-hand side, similar to Curtis's previously. It is a cube, but look what happens when you look at it on this 45-degree angle. You're doubling the amount of roses that you see, even though they don't exist in the water. You are increasing your design. So you have to be careful with this in a certain way. You don't want to make it too heavy. And you also have to understand, because of the way water magnifies things, a huge rose on the bottom might overwhelm. She's used more bud forms. It's a very carefully conceived and well executed design that way, so that things don't become too large. Nancy Reddington on the right-hand side, using one rose and coral within the water, also as underlayment, and that wonderful black painted stick that way. You'll notice on Nancy's rose there, you will see bubbles, and I'm not sure if she's using distilled water in that or not. That may work in your mind as a distinction problem, because bubbles probably should not be there, unless, of course, the title has something to do with bubbles underwater. Then it'd be perfectly fine. So, some resources for you. Betty Belcher's Creative Flower Arranging and the Ortho book for arranging cut flowers are no longer available. They are out of print, but readily available on eBay for minimal amount of money. Betty's on the left might give you some grand ideas. It's certainly not all about roses in modern arrangements, but you can easily substitute roses for anything that's there, and you have some wonderful ideas, and spark your interest and creativity by seeing some of those. The Ortho book from the middle has a wide variety of arrangement styles, much the same as we have covered in traditional, and the modern are there as well for good reminders. Perhaps not all the same terminology that we use at ARS, but one of the great things about this book is it has a very nice section on the conditioning of other floral material, how things react and how best to make them in the best shape to be placed in your design for a rose show. And finally, the Guide for Creating Rose Arrangements was a publication by the American Rose Society back in the 80s, no longer in print. There are, from what I understand, 2 copies in the library at the headquarters. You may be able to find a copy in some very old bookstore, used bookstore, and it's my hope that someday this can be put on the bookshelf of the website, because it's a great resource and a lot of great ideas. So let's now look at judging special classes and how we go about making sure that things we've heard from Elena in the first part are judged properly within a rose show. Classes that are defined as having a particular requirement are designated as special classes. And as Elena stated earlier, a non-conforming special class arrangement is ineligible for a first place or higher award. So if it is in the class of princess and it doesn't conform to that, it cannot win first place. So let's take a look at the idea of arranger's choice again. It's the option Elena stated earlier, and it must be stated on the tag if it asks for it in the schedule. So as judges, be aware of that, and that then is a conformance problem for that particular design. You would want to note that on any comments that you make, whether they're on the entry tag or another slip of paper, that the person should have put down their arranger's choice for better judging for your purposes. So the following classes are not eligible for the royalty, artist, or East Asian rosettes that we have in the show. Those are restricted to those classes that are listed in those divisions of the rose show. The princess of arrangements and miniature princess of arrangement need fresh roses and fresh rose plant material only, and no accessories are permitted. 2 arrangements here that were in that class. On the left, we have some lovely yellow, probably Austin roses in this design with rose foliage, rose stems, and rose roots. Oh, rose roots. How are you as a judge to determine if those roots are fresh. What does fresh mean? Do you want to see dirt on them? Probably not at a rose show. Can you touch it to make sure they're not dried? No, you cannot. As a group of judges within your team, you need to decide, does this rose root look reasonably fresh? And judge it accordingly. On the right-hand side, what do we see? Oh, we have light pink roses and pink blend roses, and we see some rose hips there. Oh, there's Rosa viridiflora, the green rose. It's a rose. You cannot call it something other than a rose. It doesn't smell as sweet, but it's still a rose. So this qualifies for your princess category without any problem. It's traditional in its form as a design, but it is not eligible for the royalty award. The Duchess of Arrangement and the Miniature Duchess of Arrangement require fresh roses and rose foliage with dried material. On the left, we see cactus skeleton, other dried material, fresh roses, very much following that particular requirement. On the right-hand side, very fresh roses, some dried stems and berries up top, larger branches down below. And what I really appreciate in this particular design is the use of sand to hold it all together at the base, which even gives it a more dry sense of that. Very, very inventive, very nice. The Duke of Arrangements, again, is that arrangement that is no less than 10 inches in height, width, or depth, and no more than 20 inches in height, width, or depth. I won't show you any pictures because you can't tell if it's a Duke within that 10 to 20, but you should carry a tape measure with you so that you can check to make sure that's appropriate. Court of Etiquette, as Elena mentioned, has two different styles. The exhibition features a rose arrangement with non-practical artistic display of food service items. 3 of them here for your viewing pleasure. A miniature on the left, a miniature on the right, and a standard in the middle. So there's no way you're going to use that teapot because it's glued to that wall, and the cup, saucer, and plate are standing up in that one, and the roses are throughout this design. On the right-hand side, the picnic table, small arrangement, cup, saucer, and plate. So how much the size of the picnic table distracts from the rest, but it's a good suggestion probably for this particular schedule item. Might be a picnic. Does the Disney princess interfere with the design? Perhaps. That's up for you judges to decide. In the middle, the color coordination among the components of glassware, container, roses, and plate is extraordinarily good, but you also need to judge the rose arrangement. Is it following the basic principles of design for that? So you're looking both at the exhibition as well as the rose arrangement. Then you have the functionalist. Elena mentioned it's with accessories that could function for dining as they are displayed. 3 designs here. One could question whether a couple of servings of whiskey is a meal, but it could be a part of a meal and could be used this way. On the middle, we have one tray with all the components. Is everything to scale here? Are there limitations to the size of a miniature? Court of Etiquette, your schedule should say that, and everything should be within proportion and scale for that particular description. Upper right-hand corner, we see the underlayment against black. The roses pop out in that design. The teapot and other materials there are less striking as they're put there because they're on this underalignment that's very busy. Does that detract from the overall exhibit? My eye keeps being drawn back to the rhythm within that underlayment, and it disturbs me from seeing the rose arrangement itself as well as the whole of the design. So be careful, you have to judge everything together in that respect, and be consistent in your judging of those kinds of things. And so the following are not eligible for the royalty artist or East Asian rosettes as well. The judges, as Elena noted, the district and national challenge classes that may occur at your shows. And the following classes are not eligible for the gold, silver, bronze medal certificates: rose craft and keepsake because they are dried, personal adornment because of its size and use. The judges, the national challenge classes, and the district challenge classes are not eligible for the bronze, silver, or gold medal certificates as well. So that is the end. I thank you for being here today, and we look forward to having you with us again next week as we finish off this series of sessions for the virtual Rose Arrangement Judges School. Thank you very much.